The cross is looming in the near distance. And so it is in our gospel reading. Jesus and his disciples are about to go to Jerusalem together for the last time. And Jesus is trying to prepare them for the end. They don't really understand the details, but they get the part about change. They get the part about endings. And a little rivalry begins to surface in their ranks. Endings give shape to things, for better or worse. Revolutions, movements, political parties, business partnerships, rock bands. Success can be just as damaging as failure. The end, the change, is what puts the stress on things. Yeah, I could deal with this status quo for a while. I could continue being a team player. I could keep looking out for the needs of the other guy. If things were going to go on forever, but they're about to change. I need to think about positioning myself. I need to think about the regime to come and what my place in it might be. That seems to be what James and John are thinking anyway. They approach Jesus with this classic strategy. Teacher, we want for you to do for us whatever we ask of you. Do you remember using that one? This is the old, I want you to do something for me. And then you pause without telling them what it is and hope they say yes. Oh, you want me to say what it is? Well, it's very important to me, very, very important to me, and it wouldn't be too hard for you. Isn't that all you need to know, really? Children try this sometimes. Lovers try this sometimes. Fast-talking manipulators can actually get some mileage out of it. Even if they don't find anyone literally willing to sign a blank check, they can put people back on their heels, put them starting off from an apologetic point in the conversation. I don't know if James and John are really trying to manipulate Jesus here. Maybe they're just really self-conscious about the selfish request that they're making. Maybe they're hoping that Jesus will do his mind-reading trick and nod knowingly and say, yes, I have been grooming you for this moment. And they wouldn't have to say anything out loud, and the other disciples won't be any wiser. They won't know what just transpired. They'll have an understanding. But whatever their reasoning for this approach, Jesus doesn't play along. What do you want me to do for you? He makes them say it out loud, setting up a conversation that will give him a chance to teach them and also to teach us a few things. Grant us to sit one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory. Ooh, that sounded bad. I'm already in the top 12. I'm bound to get a cabinet seat at least. Now, that sounded super greedy. But if he says yes, it will totally have been worth it. Jesus doesn't say yes or no at first. He asks a question. You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or to be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized? It's an interview question. This is a good sign. And in an interview, there's only one answer to a question like that. We are able. And I imagine he held their gaze for a moment and let the anticipation stretch out a little. And then he said, the cup that I drink, you will drink. And with the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared. Not yours to grant. Who would be granting it then? And who's more qualified than us, really? Peter? Oh, it's Peter, isn't it? We should have got him in on this one. But Jesus only has two hands. What does this mean? What does Jesus mean when he's talking to them? We try to puzzle out Jesus' saying, and sometimes we find it difficult, even though we know the end of the story, and even though we have all these commentaries and the meditations of Christians over centuries that we can resort to try to figure things out. So I think we can sympathize with the disciples and forgive them when they appear to be completely clueless sometimes. Now, we know that Jesus predicted that he was going to die. We can't miss it today because that's how our gospel reading started. But in a few weeks, when we witness once again their confusion and their dismay when the actual arrest happens. We are struck with the overwhelming impression that the whole crisis still took them by surprise somehow. How could it have? I think that when Jesus talked about his death, they hoped that it was a metaphor. They hoped that it was a parable. They didn't want that to happen. And they probably found it hard to believe that it could happen. Jesus, who was always so masterful with his enemies, that he could fall that far under their power and that something so terrible could actually happen. They were used to him saying things that they couldn't understand. So I think they had a bin in their brain marked to think about later. And I think these comments about death looming in the near future went right into that bin. But when he predicted his resurrection, they still got excited, because whatever that meant exactly, it clearly implied victory. He was going to cast off the disguise, he was going to come into his own, he was going to make known who he really was, and his enemies were going to be defeated. And there was going to be a new regime, and there was going to be a new place for the people who had been faithful to him in the meantime. James and John seem to have decided that now is the time to get their request for a promotion in. However, the details might work themselves out. So when Jesus asked, "Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized?" they probably did have a pretty good idea what he meant, because he had just said he was going to be mocked and spit upon and flogged and killed. So while they hated to be reminded of it, they couldn't have been surprised that he brought it up in this context. They couldn't really have expected to share in his glory if they weren't going to follow him all the way there. And the metaphors of the cup and the baptism, they sound a little exotic, but if you think about them, they're not too hard to understand. If you drink from the same cup as somebody, then you are sharing the fate of that person, at least insofar as the fate is determined by that cup. If there's poison in the cup, you're both going to die. If there's good wine in the cup, you're both going to be refreshed and happy. And the baptism metaphor, being baptized with the same baptism, that's sort of the inverse of the cup metaphor. Instead of having a liquid you're putting inside yourself that can do something to you, you're bathing in that liquid instead. You're sharing a bath, sharing the atmosphere, the environment that Jesus is subjecting himself to. But they said, "We are able." Yes, Jesus, we are willing to follow you into anything, even if you're talking about actual death and resurrection, because you did just raise Lazarus, after all. We are worthy to be at your right and your left hand, and we're going to prove it however we have to prove it. But they still didn't understand what they were asking. To sit at my right hand or at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared. Who is that? Who was it prepared for? This very mysterious thing he says here. Did the disciples ever find out who it was? Do we know who Jesus is talking about here? I think we do. And with him, they crucified two robbers, one on his right and one on his left. The cup that I drink, you will drink, and with the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized, but not just yet. There will be people sharing my sufferings on my right and my left when I come into my glory. But those jobs are taken. You'll have to wait your turn. And if they had understood his meaning at the time, they might have protested. We said in your glory. We said in your glory, not in your death. And he might have said to them, what is inglorious about my cross? It is my glory to die for you. For this moment, for this bloody ordeal, for this seemingly infinite indignity, I will be given a name that is above every name. And all the angels of God will glorify me and magnify me throughout all the ages of endless time, along with all the great crowd of saints that I have saved by my sacrifice and by my resurrection. If you know what you're looking at, my cross is the throne at the center of the universe. There is no kinglier act than for a monarch to die for his subjects. and in so dying, secure their salvation. You know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. But it shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. James and John were looking past the suffering. They were skipping over it. They saw it as the necessary but unpleasant business that had to be gotten out of the way before they started winning. Right. The cup and the baptism, of course. But then the right hand and the left hand of power. Let's focus on that. They didn't really understand why the suffering had to be there at all, except that in this life, it seems that that's how it's arranged. First you suffer, and first you cry, and first you suffer loss. And then, if you stick with it, and if you have somebody like Jesus on your side, the tide changes. But Jesus is telling them, no, you can't skip past the cup and the baptism. The right hand and the left hand of glory for which you are asking are the cup and the baptism. You can't share in one without sharing in the other, because they're both tied up together in me. You can't fast forward to the part where I win. You have to come with me. The suffering isn't incidental. It's how we're going to win. I'm going to break the power of death by dying. And then you're going to die with me. I am going to erase the condemnation that dooms you from your birth by being condemned. And then you will be free to condemn yourselves and not despair. I'm going to embrace unjust suffering and turn even your most justified suffering into something that strengthens you and heals you instead of destroying you. And of course, there's more to these metaphors that Jesus is using, the cup that I drink and the baptism with which I am baptized. It can't just be a coincidence that they point us to the sacraments. We've discussed their general meaning, to share the same fate as Jesus. But if that's all he meant, he could have used hundreds of other metaphors. Are you able to walk in my shoes? Are you able to wear my hat? Are you able to chew what I bite off? But no, he asks about sharing his cup and his baptism, and then just a little while later, what does he do? He gives them a cup with his blood in it to drink. And he sends them out into all the world with a baptism that will make people members of his body. So let me pose the question to you. Are you able to drink the cup that Jesus drank and to be baptized with the baptism he was baptized with? It's an uncomfortable question. Your first reaction is probably, hey man, I'm not asking to be seated at the right and the left in the throne room. I'll be happy to be the least in the kingdom of heaven. I just want to be there. So don't ask me any hard probing questions. But you know, that's the right attitude. To the extent that it's actually humility speaking and not laziness, that's exactly the attitude that Jesus was teaching his disciples here. Whoever would be first among you must be the slave of all, must make himself of no reputation, must look to the good of others instead of his own good. That's the kind of attitude that gets you exalted in the kingdom of heaven. So I ask you again, are you able to drink the cup that Jesus drank? Are you able to be baptized with the baptism he was baptized with? Your next protest is probably something like, how should I know? I'm not going to boast and say yes, and I'll never get the chance to find out, because no one's ever going to make me die for my faith. I hope. I'm not too torn up about that. But you know, that's a good answer too. It's better, much better than James and John's job interview answer. Don't think of yourself more highly than you ought. Don't place any confidence in your own faithfulness, in your own perseverance. Don't say, we are able, but rather, Lord, may I be faithful unto death, whatever death you have for me. So have we answered the question now? Or am I going to ask it again? You're suspicious, you see, because pastors like to do things in threes. And your suspicions are well-founded. Are you able to drink the cup that Jesus drank and be baptized with the baptism he is baptized with? What do you want me to say? I already said I can't answer that question. But wait. Are you baptized? Yes. Whose baptism are you baptized into? Christ's. I am baptized into Christ. And are you about to eat his body and drink his blood? That is my intention, yes. Well then, I guess you are able, because you're doing it. But able, this isn't an ability thing. I can't claim any credit for that. I was baptized as a baby. Or even if I wasn't baptized as a baby, I just asked to be baptized and somebody else did it. And the only reason I asked in the first place was that the word grabbed hold of me and made me believe. And it's no great feat to eat the communion, to eat the bread and drink the wine. Why are we talking about ability? Why am I getting credit for this? I don't want to talk about ability. I would sound like I was boasting. I would sound like I was boasting like a fool. You're right. I was just using that language because that's the language that Jesus used when James and John were talking like fools. It's not your ability. It's not your achievement. It's nothing that you can put on your resume. But you do it. By the grace of God, you do it. You share in the sufferings of Christ because he suffered for you. Christ, your elder brother, has achieved everything that can be achieved. And this is how he shares his riches with the rest of us. So come to Calvary's holy mountain. In the name of Jesus, amen.